K9, German Shepherd rejected at auction is bought by a lieutenant. What happens next shocks everyone. He was nothing but a number, scarred, silent, and shaking, inside a rusted cage. Once a loyal canine trained for the battlefield, now reduced to a forgotten lot at a rural government auction. No one raised a hand. No one even looked. Unfit for duty, the paperwork read. Too damaged to retrain. But just when the gavel was about to fall, a U.S. Army lieutenant stepped forward, and everything changed. What followed wasn't just surprising. It left every handler, officer, and onlooker absolutely speechless. Because what the lieutenant saw in that dog was more than muscle or obedience. It was purpose. And what that German Shepherd would do for him in the days to come? It's a story you'll never forget. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more powerful, true stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. Now, let's begin a journey that will take you from a broken auction house to the front lines of redemption, where one lieutenant's choice would unlock a miracle no one saw coming. The wind carried the dry scent of dust and diesel across the auction yard. Rows of cages rattled under the sun, some filled with livestock, others with discarded service dogs. Those deemed unfit, too old, too unstable, or too broken to serve anymore. Among them sat a large German Shepherd with matted fur, tired eyes, and a faint scar across his left brow. He didn't bark, he didn't move. He simply stared at the gravel beneath his paws as if trying to disappear into it. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the PA system. Lot 37, retired K9 unit, 4 years of service, no active handler, minimal documentation. Starting bid, $10. No hands rose. The crowd murmured, "Come on, folks. This one's seen combat. He's got experience, strength. Just needs the right owner." Still nothing. A man in a ball cap near the edge chuckled. "That one's broken. Look at him. Probably got PTSD. Someone else added, "Why keep a dog like that? Put him down already." The shepherd didn't flinch. His name wasn't even listed on the tag. It had been removed when he was officially retired. A quiet, symbolic erasure. The auctioneer sighed and raised the gavel. Going once. That's when a hand rose. Firm, steady, gloved in sand-colored tactical leather. "I'll take him." Heads turned. From the back of the crowd stepped a tall man in combat boots, fatigues rolled at the ankles, and a plain olive shirt that clung to his chest. His face was hard, unreadable, but his eyes, dark, clear, and unwavering, locked on the dog like he saw something no one else did. "Name, sir?" the auctioneer asked. "Lieutenant Mason Reed, U.S. Army." A hush fell. Even the livestock handlers stopped moving. "Are you sure, Lieutenant? This one's seen things. Files say he's unpredictable. Didn't even respond to the last handler they tried." I said, "I'll take him." The gavel dropped. The cage was wheeled forward, and Mason approached. The dog didn't look up. His breathing was shallow, ears tucked back, posture low. A soldier broken not by failure, but by abandonment. Mason crouched to the dog's level and said nothing for a long moment. Then, softly, "You're not broken. You just weren't finished." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar, tearing it in half. He placed one piece on the gravel just outside the cage. The shepherd sniffed, but didn't move. "That's all right," Mason murmured. "We've got time." The auction ended. Papers were signed. The crowd dispersed. By the time the sun began to lower, turning the dust gold, Mason was sitting cross-legged beside the cage, reading the dog's old service records. Scattered reports, mentions of agitation post-deployment, failure to rebond, destructive behavior. But beneath it all, one phrase stood out again and again: loyal under fire. That night, Mason brought the dog home to a small, quiet cabin 2 hours from base, surrounded by pine and silence. He carried the crate himself, placed it gently in the middle of the living room, opened the door, and stepped back. He didn't force anything. He simply sat. The shepherd didn't come out for hours, not until after midnight, when Mason had dozed off in the armchair. Did the dog finally inch forward, nose twitching? His paw touched the wooden floor, then another. Slowly, he crept toward the sleeping lieutenant, ears back, breath slow. And then, he lay down at Mason's feet. Not fully touching, just close enough to feel his warmth. When Mason stirred, his eyes opened to the sight of the yee curled by his boots. "Well," he whispered, "that's a start." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, a soldier and a dog, both tired, both scarred, both rejected, shared their first night in a place neither thought they'd find again, home. The following morning, light streamed through the cabin windows and spilled across the hardwood floor. Mason woke to the rhythmic sound of slow, deliberate breathing. At his feet, the German shepherd was still there, curled like a question mark, head resting near his boots. The dog stirred as Mason sat up, lifting his head but not moving away. It was progress, small but important. Mason didn't speak right away. He stood, stretched, and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl and filling it with water. Then he reached into the cupboard and poured a generous helping of dry food into another bowl. He set both on the floor and backed away. The shepherd watched him with wary eyes. His body was stiff, uncertain, but hunger won out. Cautiously, he stepped forward and began to eat. Mason watched in silence. "You're not ready for touch," he muttered. "I get that." He picked up his phone and tapped the screen, scrolling through old contacts. He found the name he was looking for: Sergeant Julia Vega, former K-9 trainer, now retired, living just outside Colorado Springs. He hesitated, then hit call. "Reed?" Her voice came through, sharp as ever. "You still breathing?" "Just barely." "What's this about?" "I picked up a dog," Mason said. K-9, auctioned off. No name, no handler, 4 years deployed. Julia was quiet on the other end. "You're kidding me," she said finally. "They're still doing that?" "He was invisible out there, Julia. No one even looked at him." "You know what that tells me?" she said. "He was good. Too good. Dogs like that get used hard. No backup. Just tossed aside when they stop performing." "Yeah," Mason said. "I figured." "What's he like?" "Quiet. Scared? Not aggressive, not yet." "You need help?" "Just advice." Julia sighed. "Don't rush him. Give him space. Sleep near him. Don't talk too much. Let him come to you." Mason glanced at the shepherd, now licking his bowl clean. Already started. Later that day, Mason built a routine. No leash, no pressure, just presence. He worked outside on the porch, repairing a section of the old railing. The shepherd sat in the doorway, half in, half out, watching. When Mason went for a walk through the trees, the dog followed at a distance, never too close, never too far. Mason started calling him Ghost. It wasn't official, he hadn't put it on a tag, but the name felt right. The dog moved like smoke, silent, alert, untouchable, haunted, maybe, like Mason. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the pines, Mason lit a fire in the living room. He sat on the rug, boots off, sipping black coffee. Ghost approached slowly, sat a few feet away and lowered himself into a sphinx-like position. His ears were still on edge, eyes scanning every flicker of flame, but he didn't retreat. Mason placed a tennis ball between them. Didn't say a word. Ghost stared at it, then at him. After a full minute, the dog nudged it with his nose. Just a tap. then another. Mason smiled. There he is. They did this for 4 nights. Just Mason, the fire, and the ball. By the 5th night, Ghost brought it to him. That same evening, something unexpected happened. As Mason sat on the porch, writing in a weathered notebook, Ghost crept up behind him and placed his head gently against Mason's shoulder. No warning, no sound, just weight, warmth, trust. Mason froze, afraid to breathe. "You good?" he whispered. Ghost didn't move, didn't flinch. Mason reached up, slow, careful, and laid a hand on Ghost's head. The dog closed his eyes. That night, Mason didn't sleep in the armchair. He lay on the rug beside Ghost, one hand resting on his back as the wind whispered outside. They had a long way to go. Broken dogs didn't heal overnight. But in that moment, under the stars and the soft breath of firelight, Mason knew one thing with absolute certainty. Ghost was choosing him. By the 3rd week, the forest around Mason's cabin had begun to bloom. Spring had a way of waking the world slowly, first through scent, then through sound. The birds returned, the leaves unfurled. And in the middle of it all, a German shepherd named Ghost began to come back to life. The change was subtle at first. Ghost would now sit beside Mason on the porch without needing distance. He'd sleep closer at night, breathe steadier, flinch less. When Mason went for early morning runs through the pines, Ghost ran beside him, not behind, not away. But what happened on the 21st day changed everything. Mason had taken Ghost into town for the first time. It wasn't easy. He didn't use a leash. Ghost didn't need one. What he needed was control, calm, and room to move. They kept to the side streets of the small mountain town, avoiding crowds, passing old diners and hardware stores. Most folks paid no mind. But outside of the gas station, a group of teenagers crowded the sidewalk. Music thumped from one of their phones, and laughter broke loud through the air. Ghost froze. His muscles stiffened. His ears pinned back. Mason noticed immediately. He crouched low, voice steady. "It's okay. We're not in danger." But Ghost wasn't looking at the teens. He was looking at a man standing beside them. A stranger in a black hoodie with a backpack slung too low, watching them intently. There was something in his stance, something wrong. Then it happened. The man reached into his backpack in a sharp, sudden movement. Ghost barked. Not a whimper, not a growl. A full, deafening, protective bark, loud enough to make the teens jump and scatter. Mason turned just as the man dropped his backpack and bolted down the street. A clerk from the gas station came rushing out. "What the hell was that?" Mason opened the backpack and found what Ghost had sensed before anyone else could. A crowbar, gloves, and a ski mask. The man had been about to rob the station. The clerk's hands trembled. "That dog saved my store." Mason looked at Ghost, who was now standing tall, tail still, head lifted. For the first time, Mason saw what the army had once seen. Not a broken animal, a protector, a soldier. "You remember your training?" Mason said under his breath. "You were just waiting for a reason to use it again." The local sheriff showed up minutes later. After taking statements and reviewing the situation, he walked over and shook Mason's hand. "That dog still got a job somewhere?" Mason shrugged. "Not officially." The sheriff grinned. "Well, if you ever want to volunteer him for K9 support, I've got a town that could use a nose like that." That night back at the cabin, Mason built a small fire outside instead of in. Ghost sat beside him, silent but alert. "You saved a life today," Mason said softly. "Maybe more than one." Ghost didn't respond. He didn't need to. He looked out into the trees, head tilted toward the breeze. He was different now, a little taller, a little stronger. His eyes held something that hadn't been there before. Purpose, Mason tossed a stick out toward the clearing. Ghost watched it. Then, to Mason's surprise, he stood, ran after it, and brought it back. It wasn't much, but it was joy, pure and unforced. They played fetch until the fire dimmed and the stars took over the sky. Later that night, as Mason scribbled in his notebook, he wrote a single sentence. Ghost barked today. It wasn't just a noise. It was proof that something deep inside him had come back to life. The storm rolled in without warning. It began with wind, sharp, sudden gusts that howled through the trees and rattled the cabin's old windows. Mason was outside chopping firewood when he felt the drop in pressure. The air turned heavy, the sky darkened, and the first flash of lightning cracked in the distance like a warning shot. Ghost, who had been lounging near the porch, snapped to attention. Mason noticed it immediately. His tail tucked low, his ears flattening, and his body stiffening like a spring wound too tight. The thunder followed seconds later, loud and deep. Ghost flinched violently and darted under the deck before Mason could react. Ghost! Mason dropped the axe and moved toward the crawl space. He crouched to see beneath the porch. Ghost was curled up in the farthest corner, panting fast, his whole body trembling. His eyes were wide with panic, eyes that, weeks ago, had known only numbness, now flooded with fear. It wasn't just thunder. This was trauma. Mason remembered Julia's words on the phone weeks earlier. Some of them react to storms like they're back in combat. Explosions, flashes, sounds that pull them right into memory. Ghost, it's okay, Mason said, his voice low, calm, almost a whisper. You're not there. You're here, you're safe. He didn't try to pull him out. Instead, Mason crawled in too. He lay on the cold dirt beside Ghost, close enough that the dog could feel his warmth, but not touching. The wind howled louder. A tree branch cracked somewhere nearby. Ghost shuddered violently and let out a soft whine. It's not your fault, Mason said, resting his head back against the foundation. None of it. They stayed like that for over an hour. When the rain started, Mason didn't move. Neither did Ghost. But eventually, as the thunder softened and the lightning pulled farther away, Ghost shifted closer, his paw resting against Mason's boot. Mason looked down and smiled faintly. Attaboy. That night, the power went out. Candles flickered through the cabin, casting long shadows on the walls. Mason toweled Ghost dry and wrapped him in an old flannel blanket. He noticed the scar again, the one over Ghost's left eye, a thin line of raised flesh, partially hidden by fur. He'd never asked about it before. Never tried to find out the dog's real name, his former handlers, or what battlefield had broken him, but now he needed to know. Mason returned to the sparse military documents he'd gathered from the auction. One had a blurry photo attached, a younger Ghost, his fur darker, his body leaner, standing beside a Marine with his arm around him. The name listed was Jackal, and the handler's name, Staff Sergeant Ryan Ellison. A quick search revealed the truth. Ryan had been killed overseas during a raid. An explosion had separated him from his unit. Ghost, then Jackal, had stayed beside him until help arrived, refusing to leave the body. The scar had come from that same night. Mason sat in silence, reading the report twice, 3 times. The dog had never abandoned his partner, but the system had abandoned him. Mason looked over at Ghost. No, Jackal, curled by the fireplace, half asleep, breathing steady now that the storm had passed. You're not a ghost, Mason whispered. You're a guardian. For the first time, Mason didn't feel like he had saved the dog. He felt like he'd been chosen. The storm outside had passed, but the one between them, the quiet storm of trauma, silence, and unspoken grief, had begun to clear. There was still more to face, but now they'd face it together. It was nearly dawn when Mason's phone rang. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock. 5:12 a.m. Only military or bad news came this early. He picked up the phone, voice groggy. "Reed?" A familiar voice answered. "Sheriff Dalton, sorry for the hour. We've got a situation." Mason sat upright. Ghost, Jackal, lifted his head from where he lay on the rug, ears pricked. Dalton continued. "There's a missing boy, 8 years old. Disappeared overnight from a campsite up by Falcon Ridge. Forest's dense, cold. We've got limited visibility." Mason's stomach tightened. "Search dogs?" "None available this early. Closest team's 4 hours out. But I thought of your dog. After what he did at the station, you think he's got it in him?" Mason looked down at Jackal. He didn't hesitate. "We'll be there in 30. The sky was still gray when they arrived at the trailhead. Police cruisers and search volunteers were scattered through the woods. A woman in tears clutched a photo of a small boy with freckles and a missing front tooth. His name was Caleb. Mason approached the command tent. Sheriff Dalton briefed him quickly. Caleb had wandered away during the night, possibly chasing after something. No one noticed until just before dawn. "Every hour counts," Dalton said. Temperature dropped fast. Kid could be hypothermic by now. Mason crouched beside Jackal and opened the evidence bag they'd been given. Inside was a tattered red hoodie. He held it out. Jackal sniffed it once, then twice. His muscles tensed, nose twitching, ears sharpening like antennae. Mason gave him the signal. "Find him." The German Shepherd took off into the trees, Mason right behind him. They moved fast. Jackal weaving through thick pine, his body low, his mummies to the earth. Mason kept pace, adrenaline surging, heart pounding. They climbed a narrow ridge, crossed a shallow creek, then veered left into denser brush. Half an hour passed, then Jackal stopped. He barked once, loud and sharp. Mason caught up, scanning the clearing. There, beneath the roots of a fallen tree, lay a small figure curled in on itself. The red hoodie was soaked. The boy's lips were blue. "Caleb!" Mason dropped to his knees, checked for a pulse, weak but present. The boy stirred faintly, mumbling something incoherent. Jackal stood watch, pacing in a tight circle, ears alert, protective. Mason grabbed his radio. "We found him. 1 click northeast of base camp. Requesting immediate medevac. Hypothermia setting in." Within 20 minutes, rescue arrived. EMTs carried Caleb out on a stretcher, oxygen mask over his face, heat packs wrapped around him. His mother sobbed when she saw him, collapsing into the arms of a deputy. Jackal stood by Mason's side, quiet but proud. Sheriff Dalton approached. "You just saved a life, Lieutenant." Mason shook his head. "He did." Dalton looked at Jackal. "What's his name again?" Mason hesitated. "He used to be called Jackal, but now I just call him partner." Back at the cabin that evening, Mason lit the fireplace as Jackal lay curled nearby, paws twitching slightly in his sleep. The day's events had drained them both, but something had changed. Jackal wasn't a ghost anymore, not to the world, not to Mason. He had stepped back into his purpose, on his own terms. Mason picked up his phone to check the news. Already the story had spread. Retired K9 finds missing team in Colorado wilderness. There was a photo attached. Mason standing in the woods, one hand resting gently on the head of a proud, alert German Shepherd. A knock came at the door. Mason opened it to find Julia Vega, her face soft with emotion. "You didn't tell me you were bringing him back." He stepped aside. "Didn't know I was." He chose to come back on his own. Julia crouched and scratched behind Jackal's ears. The dog opened one eye, then rested his head back down. You gave him what no one else did, she said. Time, patience, trust. Mason looked down at Jackal, then back at Julia. No, he said. He gave that to me. The story of the rescue spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up first, then regional stations. By the end of the week, Jackal was being called the forgotten hero-turned-savior. Mason didn't care much for the headlines, but he did care about what it meant for Jackal. No longer a file marked unfit. No longer a ghost in the corner of a cold auction lot. He was seen now, respected, wanted. But not everyone wanted him for the right reasons. The call came from Fort Klein, an army base several hours south of the cabin. A major named Travis Holcomb introduced himself over the phone, polite but formal. We've been following the story, Lieutenant, he said. That shepherd of yours, he was once assigned to our unit. We'd like to evaluate him for possible reactivation into non-combat support. Mason stiffened. You mean take him back? Not forcefully, but yes, we believe he still has value. Trauma recovery therapy, detection work. He was one of the best. I know, Mason said quietly. I've seen it. We're not here to erase what you've done, the major added, but he's still government property technically. Mason hung up without saying goodbye. That night, he didn't sleep. Jackal sensed it. He paced the cabin restlessly, his nose twitching, eyes searching Mason's face for something he couldn't name. Mason finally sat on the floor beside him, running a hand through his fur. They want you back, boy. Jackal lay down but didn't look away. They say it's for good reasons. Therapy, detection, controlled environments. But you and I both know, he trailed off. He didn't want to say it out loud, that once they had him again, they might never let him go. 2 days later, a military vehicle pulled up the gravel road. The major stepped out in full dress uniform, clean cut, with a clipboard in hand. We're not here to make trouble, he said, just to assess. 30-minute evaluation. Mason said nothing. Jackal stood beside him, unmoving. Holcomb set up a small course in the field beside the cabin. Scent samples, obedience commands, simulated stress sounds, recordings of gunfire, sirens, crowd noise, things that used to make Jackal tremble. But this time, he didn't flinch. He moved with purpose, precision. He obeyed only Mason's commands, ignored Holcomb completely. The major watched, increasingly tense. This is remarkable, he said after the final test. But he doesn't respond to my voice. He's not yours anymore, Mason said. Holcomb nodded slowly. That may be true, but the report I file won't be based on opinion. If command decides to reassign him, Mason stepped forward, firm. With respect, Major, this dog isn't a weapon anymore. He's a survivor. You left him to rot in a cage. I found him there. I rebuilt him. You want him back now because he's useful again, but I want him because he's family. Silence stretched between them. Jackal sat down calmly at Mason's side, his head brushing against Mason's hand. Holcomb looked at the scene for a long moment. Then he sighed. Consider the evaluation complete. And, off the record. He turned, got back in his vehicle, and left. That night, the storm returned, but not the kind that shook Ghost weeks ago. This one was soft, rain tapping gently on the roof, thunder mumbling in the distance. Mason sat by the fire, Jackal curled beside him, dry and warm. He scratched behind the dog's ears. They won't come back, he whispered. Not after today. Jackal didn't stir. He was asleep, one paw twitching in dream. Outside, the pines swayed under the silver moonlight. Inside, the test was over. Jackal had proven something no report ever could. He wasn't owned. He was free. And now, he was exactly where he belonged. A week passed. The world moved on from Jackal's story. News crews stopped calling. The photo of Mason and Jackal that once made headlines faded from social media feeds. But in the quiet forest cabin, nothing had changed. Jackal still rose at dawn, patrolled the perimeter, sat by the porch with his ears high and eyes scanning the tree line. Mason kept writing in his notebook, always beginning each entry with 2 words. He's here. Then, one cold Saturday morning, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A letter with no return address. Mason opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper and a smaller envelope. The letter was handwritten, neat, in block letters. You don't know me, but I knew Ryan Ellison. I was there the night he died. Jackal saved our entire unit. He wouldn't leave Ryan's side. We were the ones who had to carry him away. He howled for hours. After that, he stopped barking. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't look at any of us. We thought he died inside. I never forgave myself for what happened after. How the system discarded him. I have lived with it. But I saw the story. I saw the photo. And I cried. You gave him back his name, his purpose, his peace, thank you. Corporal Matthew Hoyle. Inside the smaller envelope was a patch. Ellison's unit insignia, slightly frayed, worn by time but preserved with care. Mason sat down on the porch, speechless. Jackal approached, head tilting, sensing something had shifted. Mason opened his hand and held out the patch. Jackal sniffed it, paused, then sat quietly beside Mason, eyes fixed on the trees. He never forgot you, Mason whispered. And you never forgot him. That night, Mason made a decision. He and Jackal drove to the State Veteran Memorial, arriving just as the sun began to set. The rows of names on the black stone shimmered in the golden light. A few visitors stood silently with hats pressed to their chests. Mason found Ellison's name etched in the third panel. He knelt, laid the patch beneath it, and said nothing. Jackal sat beside him, head lowered, motionless. They stayed there for a long time, until the sun disappeared completely, and the wind picked up through the trees. Then, Jackal did something Mason would never forget. He stood, stepped forward, and pressed his paw gently against Ellison's name. No one else saw. No one needed to. It was a goodbye, years late, but finally delivered. Back at the cabin, life settled into something beautiful. Jackal now responded to both names, Jackal and Ghost, depending on Mason's tone. He followed commands, played fetch, rolled in the grass like a pup when the mood struck. But most of all, he stayed close. One morning, Mason opened the front door to find a boy standing on the porch. It was Caleb, the child Jackal had rescued in the forest. He held a drawing in his hands. I drew your dog, he said with a smile. Mason knelt. That's beautiful, buddy. Jackal patted over and sat calmly as Caleb held out the drawing. It showed a big brown timut with a scar standing in front of a cabin with a red sun in the sky. He's not scary, Caleb said. He's safe. Jackal leaned forward and gently licked the boy's hand. Mason felt his throat tighten. Later that day, he framed the drawing and hung it above the fireplace. Underneath it, he placed a small wooden plaque. Jackal, K9, Warrior, Savior, Furman, Friend. He sat down next to Jackal, who laid his head on Mason's lap. You did it, Mason said softly. You came back. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind passed through the trees like a whisper, and in the stillness of that quiet home, far from war zones, from cages, from silence, one forgotten dog found not just a second chance, but the ending he always deserved. If this story touched your heart, remember, courage and loyalty can overcome any storm. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this story with someone who still believes in second chances.